A struggling single dad picked up a hitchhiker. He had no idea she was the daughter of a billionaire. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The rain hammered down in relentless sheets, turning the Montana highway into a slick ribbon of asphalt. Colt Dawson squinted through the windshield of his aging pickup, wipers frantically battling the deluge. Beside him, his son Levi coughed, a deep rattling sound that made Colt's heart clench. The boy's asthma had been acting up, and this damp weather wasn't helping. As they rounded a bend, Colt's headlights caught a figure on the roadside, a woman, drenched and shivering, her thumb extended in a desperate plea. Common sense told him to keep driving. Picking up strangers wasn't wise, but something in her posture, a kind of weary defeat, tugged at him. He eased the truck to a stop and rolled down the window. "Need a lift?" The woman peered in, water streaming down her face. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Hop in," Colt said, reaching over to open the door. She climbed in, hugging herself for warmth. Levi offered a small, hesitant smile from the back seat. "I'm Colt," he said, pulling back onto the road. "This here's my son, Levi." "If," she replied, her teeth chattering. "Where you headed?" "If," she hesitated. "Nowhere in particular." "Just away," Colt nodded, sensing a story she wasn't ready to share. "Well, you're welcome to dry off at our place. It's not much, but it's warm." She glanced at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Thank you. That would be kind." The Dawson home was a modest cabin nestled among towering pines. Inside, Colt handed Eve a towel and one of his late wife's sweaters. "Bathrooms down the hall if you want to change." Eve took the offered items, her fingers brushing his. "You're very generous." "Just neighborly," Colt replied, though he knew neighbors were few and far between out here. As the evening wore on, Eve warmed up, both physically and emotionally. She laughed softly at Levi's jokes and helped Colt with the dishes after a simple meal. There was a grace to her movements, an elegance that seemed out of place in their rustic setting. Over the next few days, Eve settled into their routine. She helped Levi with his schoolwork, her patience seemingly endless. Colt found himself watching her, drawn to the way she brought a lightness to their home that had been missing since his wife's passing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Colt found Eve on the porch, staring into the distance. "Penny into the distance." "For your thoughts?" he asked, leaning against the railing. She sighed. "I was just thinking about choices. How one decision can change everything." Colt nodded. "Life's full of forks in the road." She turned to him, vulnerability in her eyes. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." He tensed but kept his voice steady. "Go on." Eve took a deep breath. "My full name is Evelyn Langford. My father is Conrad Langford." Colt's eyes widened. Conrad Langford was a name everyone knew, a tech magnate with more money than some small countries. "I couldn't stand the life he planned for me," she continued. "The expectations, the lack of freedom. So I left, hoping to find something real." Colt absorbed her words. "Well, you found real here. We're about as real as it gets." She smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Yes, I have." Their closeness grew, an unspoken understanding blossoming between them. But shadows loomed. Levi's asthma attacks became more frequent, more severe. One night, as Levi gasped for breath, panic gripped Colt. They were miles from the nearest hospital, and the storm had washed out the roads. Eve sprang into action, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Colt's fear. She retrieved a sleek satellite phone from her bag, a device far beyond anything Colt had seen. "I can get help," she said, determination in her voice. Colt hesitated. "But if you call, I know," she interrupted. "But Levi needs help now." She made the call, speaking in clipped tones. Within minutes, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Medics arrived, stabilizing Levi and transporting him to a state-of-the-art facility. Colt stood by Levi's bedside, relief washing over him. Eve stood nearby, her expression unreadable. "You saved him," Colt said, gratitude evident. The Montana sky stretched endlessly, a canvas of deep blues and purples as dusk settled over the Dawson homestead. Inside the modest cabin, the aroma of simmering stew mingled with the faint scent of pine that drifted through the open windows. Evelyn, now affectionately known as Elle, stood at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. Her once pristine hands, accustomed to boardrooms and high society, now bore the faint nicks and calluses of a life rediscovered. Colt Dawson entered, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. He paused, watching Elle with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. It had been months since that fateful stormy night when their paths had crossed, altering the course of their lives. In that time, Elle had become an integral part of their small family, her presence a soothing balm on old wounds. "Something smells good," Colt remarked, moving to stand beside her. Elle glanced up, a smile lighting her features. "Just an old recipe I picked up. Thought it might be nice for a change." He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Every meal you've made has been a welcome change." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of laughter from the adjacent room. Levi, Colt's young son, was sprawled on the floor, engrossed in a board game with a new friend, a boy from his school named Daniel. Elle watched them fondly, her heart swelling at the sight of Levi's happiness. As night deepened, the household settled into a comfortable rhythm. Colt sat by the fireplace, whittling a piece of wood, while Elle curled up with a book, the soft glow of the lamp casting a halo around her. The tranquility was a stark contrast to the chaos that had once defined their lives. But peace, as they had learned, was often fleeting. A few days later, while tending to the garden, Elle noticed a sleek black car approaching the property. Her heart clenched as memories of her past life surged forward. The vehicle came to a halt, and a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out. "Evelyn," he greeted, his tone a blend of relief and reproach. "Father," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Colt emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He took in the scene, his protective instincts flaring. "Mr. Langford," Colt acknowledged, his tone neutral but firm. Conrad Langford's gaze shifted to Colt, assessing. "Mr. Dawson, I presume. Oh, sirs." "May we speak privately, Evelyn?" Elle nodded, leading her father to a secluded spot beneath the towering pines. "I've been searching for you," Conrad began, his facade of control slipping. "You vanished without a trace." "I needed to find myself," Elle replied. "Away from the expectations, the suffocating lifestyle." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I understand that now, but you belong with your family." She met his gaze, determination shining in her eyes. "I have a family here. With Colt and Levi." Yes, Conrad's expression softened. "If this is truly what you want, I won't stand in your way. But know that my support remains, always." Tears welled in Elle's eyes as she embraced her father, years of tension melting away. As Conrad departed, leaving behind a promise of reconciliation, Elle felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She returned to the cabin, where Colt awaited, concern etched on his face. "Everything all right?" he inquired. Elle nodded, slipping her hand into his. "Yes, for the first time in a long while. Everything feels right." Their journey had been fraught with challenges, but together they had found a sanctuary in each other. a testament to the healing power of love and the courage to forge one's own path. The Montana sky stretched wide and unyielding, a canvas of eyes, muted grays as autumn settled over the Dawson homestead. Inside the modest cabin, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Evelyn, known to Colt and Levi as Elle, stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where storm clouds gathered ominously. It had been weeks since Levi's near-fatal asthma attack, a harrowing event that had shattered the fragile equilibrium they'd established. In the desperate scramble to save the boy, Evelyn had revealed her true identity and the vast wealth she had tried to leave behind. The revelation hung between her and Colt like an unbridgeable chasm. Colt sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. The lines on his face seemed deeper, etched by sleepless nights and the weight of betrayal. He had opened his home and heart to Elle, believing her to be a kindred spirit seeking solace from a troubled past. Now, he grappled with the reality that she was Evelyn Langford, heiress to a tech empire, a world far removed from his own. Levi, oblivious to the undercurrents, played quietly in the corner. His recovery steady but slow. He would glance up occasionally, sensing the unease but not comprehending its depth. Breaking the silence, Evelyn turned to Colt, her voice tentative. "Colt, I never meant to deceive you. I was running from a life that felt suffocating, seeking something real. What I found here with you and Levi, it's more genuine than anything I've ever known." Colt's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the tabletop. "Real, huh? Hard to trust what's real when it's built on half-truths." She stepped closer, the distance between them feeling vast, despite the few feet. "I understand your anger. I should have told you sooner. But please believe me, my feelings for you and Levi are real." He looked up then, meeting her eyes with a mixture of hurt and longing. "I let you into our lives, Evelyn. I trusted you. Now, I don't know what to think." Before she could respond, the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle interrupted them. Colt stood, peering out the window as a sleek black car navigated the dirt road leading to the cabin. His muscles tensed, a protective instinct kicking in. Evelyn's face paled. "It's my father." The car came to a stop, and a man stepped out, tall, distinguished with an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. Conrad Langford surveyed the rustic surroundings, with thinly veiled disdain before his gaze settled on the cabin. Evelyn moved to the door, opening it before her father could knock. "Father, what are you doing here?" Conrad's eyes softened slightly as he took in his daughter. "Evelyn, it's time to come home. You've had your adventure, but this," he gestured around, "isn't where you belong." Colt stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Conrad and Evelyn. "She belongs where she chooses." Conrad's gaze flicked to Colt, assessing. "And you must be Mr. Dawson." "I appreciate your hospitality toward my daughter." "But surely you understand that her place is with her family." Evelyn squared her shoulders, determination flashing in her eyes. "I am with my family." Conrad's expression hardened. "Evelyn, enough. This charade has gone on long enough. Think of your responsibilities, your future." She shook her head. "My future is here with Colt and Levi. I won't return to a life dictated by obligations I never chose." The tension was palpable, a standoff between two worlds. Levi, sensing the gravity of the moment, clutched Colt's hand, seeking reassurance. Conrad's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well, if that's your decision." He reached into his coat, pulling out an envelope, which he extended toward Colt. "For your troubles." Colt's eyes narrowed as he took the envelope, feeling the thickness of it. "Money." Anger flared. "We don't need your money." Conrad's gaze remained steady. "Consider it compensation for any inconvenience." With deliberate calm, Colt tore the envelope in half, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "The only thing I need is for you to respect your daughter's choices." For a moment, surprise flickered across Conrad's face before his mask of indifference returned. "I see. Goodbye, Evelyn." He turned, walking back to his car without another word. The vehicle disappeared down the road, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Evelyn exhaled shakily, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Colt reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Are you sure about this?" She nodded, tears brimming. "I've never been more sure of anything." Levi wrapped his arms around both of them, his small voice breaking the silence. "Does this mean you're staying, Elle?" Evelyn knelt to his level, cupping his face gently. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm staying." The days that followed were a blend of healing and adjustment. Evelyn, no longer burdened by secrets, embraced her place within the Dawson family fully. She and Colt worked side by side, tending to the homestead, their partnership deepening with each passing day. Yet, the silence between heartbeats, Colt Dawson stood on the front porch, the screen door creaking as it swayed in the wind, now absent of her shadow. The road stretched long and lonely, as if mocking the silence she left behind. Levy's paper airplane lay crumpled in the mud by the gate, its wings torn, just like the trust Evelyn had rebuilt, and in a single moment broken. The moment Colt saw the name flash on her phone, Langford, he knew not just who she was, but what she'd been hiding all along. Evelyn Langford, daughter of Conrad Langford, the same man who'd shuttered half the local mills and tried to buy out Colt's family land 2 years ago. The same man who, from the shadows, manipulated entire towns like chessboards. And she'd been living under his roof, laughing with Levi, folding Colt's laundry. She hadn't tried to explain, just whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked out the door when the black SUVs rolled up, their tinted windows gleaming like judgment. Now the house was too quiet. Levi hadn't spoken much since. He clung to the blanket she'd patched for him during that first stormy week, curled up on the couch like a boy unsure if his whole world had been a dream. That night, Colt sat on the edge of Levy's bed, reading from the same constellation book Evelyn had once read to them both. His voice cracked over the story of Andromeda and Perseus, but he finished it. When he closed the book, Levi looked up and whispered, "Is Mary coming back?" Colt smoothed his son's hair. "Her name's Evelyn, and I don't know, buddy." Levi blinked slowly. "But she loves us." That broke Colt in a way the betrayal hadn't, because love, real love, wasn't something you could fake around Levi. And yet she had lied, hid, protected herself while wrapping herself in their lives like she belonged. 3 weeks passed. Montana snow came early that year, blanketing the town in white and sharpening every absence. Evelyn Langford reappeared not in person, but in a donation, an anonymous check delivered to the local clinic. It covered Levy's treatment for a year. No press release, no return address, just quiet generosity. Mrs. Yates from the pharmacy handed Colt the envelope with trembling fingers. "She did love that boy, you know," she said softly. Colt didn't reply. He couldn't. Not yet. That night, as Levi slept soundly for the first time in weeks, Colt went out to the barn. The Mustang they'd worked on together sat untouched. He ran his hand across the hood, remembering her laughter when she'd accidentally painted her elbow. He started the engine, let it rumble to life, then turned it off. The next morning, Colt made a decision. He drove 2 hours to Helena, to a modest clinic nestled beside a children's center. Evelyn was there, hair pulled in a simple bun, reading to a group of kids. Not a trace of design or polish left. Just her, a paperback copy of The Little Prince, and a circle of giggling children. She saw him through the window, froze, then gently handed the book to a nurse before stepping outside. Her breath formed white clouds in the cold air. "You shouldn't be here." "Probably not," he replied. "But Levi misses you." She looked down, tears welling. "I never meant to lie. I just needed to know what it was like to be someone other than Langford's daughter. And when I met you two, it became harder and harder to leave. You should have told me. I was afraid if I did, the story would end." Colt's voice softened. "It did. But maybe it's time to write another one. Truthfully this time." Evelyn stared at him, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "You'd really want that? Even knowing who I am?" "I know who you are, not who the headlines say you are. You're the woman who stayed up helping Levi make a solar system out of cereal boxes. The one who burned pancakes and cried when he had his first attack." He paused. "And I'm the man who still sets a place for you at dinner." She stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as if afraid the moment would shatter. "Colt, we're not perfect, Evelyn. We never were. But Levi keeps asking if stars ever come back. I want to tell him sometimes if we're lucky they do." And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. They stood there in the falling snow, not fixing what was broken, but deciding to build something new, something honest. And this time no one was pretending. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above Colt Dawson's modest ranch, its vastness mirroring the emptiness that had settled in his heart. Since Evelyn's departure, a silence had enveloped the house, a stark contrast to the warmth and laughter she had brought into their lives. Levi, his young son, felt the absence acutely, often retreating into quiet contemplation, clutching the blanket Evelyn had once mended for him. The revelation of Evelyn's true identity as the heiress to the Langford fortune had been a blow, shaking the very foundation of trust they'd built. Yet amidst the betrayal, he couldn't dismiss the genuine moments they'd shared. The tender glances, the shared dreams, the unspoken promises. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch demanded Colt's attention. The routine tasks provided a semblance of normalcy, yet every corner of the homestead echoed with memories of Evelyn. One evening, as Colt sorted through the day's mail, he noticed an envelope from the local clinic. His brow furrowed as he read its contents. A notification that Levi's medical expenses had been anonymously covered for the foreseeable future. Colt's heart clenched. He had no doubt who was behind this act of generosity. Despite the distance she'd placed between them, Evelyn was still watching over them, ensuring Levi received the care he needed. The realization was both comforting and tormenting. In the bustling city, Evelyn Langford moved through her days with practiced grace, attending charity events and board meetings, her face a mask of composure. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, her thoughts constantly drifted to a small ranch in Montana and the two souls she'd left behind. She monitored Levi's health from afar, her influence ensuring he lacked for nothing. But material provisions couldn't bridge the chasm of longing that separated her from the family she'd come to cherish. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the golden hues painted the landscape, Colt saddled his horse and rode out to the meadow where he and Evelyn had once shared whispered dreams. The wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers, evoking memories that tightened his throat. He dismounted and sank onto the grass, allowing the solitude to wash over him. Reaching into his pocket, Colt retrieved a crumpled photograph, a candid shot of Evelyn laughing, her eyes alight with unguarded joy. He traced her image with a calloused finger, the ache in his chest intensifying. The love he felt for her hadn't diminished. If anything, it had deepened, tempered by understanding and forgiveness. Determination settled over him. He couldn't let pride or fear dictate his actions. Evelyn had made a choice to protect them, but perhaps it was time to challenge that decision, to show her that love, in its truest form, was worth fighting for. Back in the city, Evelyn stood on the balcony of her penthouse, gazing out at the sprawling skyline. The world below bustled with life, yet she felt like a mere spectator, disconnected and adrift. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see her assistant holding out a letter, the paper bearing the familiar handwriting that made her heart skip a beat. With trembling hands, Evelyn unfolded the note. Colt's words were simple yet profound, an invitation to return, to rebuild, to embrace the love they'd both been denying themselves. Tears blurred her vision as hope, tentative yet persistent, blossomed within her. The following week, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the Montana plains, a car pulled up to the Dawson Ranch. Levi, playing on the porch, looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief before joy overtook him. "Mary!" he cried, using the name he'd first known her by, as he sprinted toward the woman stepping out of the vehicle. Evelyn dropped to her knees, enveloping Levi in a fierce embrace, her tears mingling with his laughter. Over his shoulder she met Colt's gaze as he stood in the doorway, a mixture of vulnerability and love etched on his face. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Colt admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn rose, taking a hesitant step toward him. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." He closed the distance between them, cupping her face with gentle hands. "We've both made mistakes, but running away doesn't mend what's broken. Staying does." A sob escaped her as she nodded, leaning into his touch. "I want to stay. If you'll have me." Colt's response was to draw her into a tender kiss, sealing a promise of new beginnings. Levi cheered, wrapping his small arms around them both, anchoring them to the present, to the family they were ready to become. As the stars emerged, twinkling witnesses to their reunion, the trio stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, fortified by love, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that together they could weather any storm. In the heart of Montana, where the vast sky met rolling plains, Colt Dawson's ranch stood as a testament to resilience and simplicity. The modest homestead had weathered many storms, both literal and figurative, but none as profound as the departure of Evelyn Langford. Her absence was a palpable void, felt deeply by both Colt and his young son, Levi. Evelyn, once an enigmatic presence in their lives, had returned to her world of affluence and obligation. Yet, the trappings of wealth felt hollow without the genuine connections she'd forged in Montana. Determined to channel her resources meaningfully, she transformed her family's foundation into a beacon of hope for children facing health challenges similar to Levi's. Her days were consumed with establishing programs for single parents, funding pediatric research, and volunteering at local hospitals. Despite her outward poise, Evelyn's heart remained tethered to the simple joys she'd experienced with Colt and Levi. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Evelyn sorted through correspondence in her sunlit study, a small, crumpled paper airplane tumbled out from between the pages of a report. She recognized it instantly, one of Levi's creations, a remnant from an afternoon filled with laughter and carefree play. The sight of it unleashed a torrent of memories, and tears welled in her eyes as she traced the creases of the delicate paper. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Colt stood by the fence, watching Levi attempt to fly another of his paper airplanes against a the gentle breeze. The boy's face was a mixture of concentration and subdued joy, a shadow of the exuberance he displayed when Evelyn had been part of their daily lives. Colt's heart ached at the sight, torn between gratitude for Evelyn's continued support, anonymous donations that ensured Levi's medical needs were met, and the lingering pain of her departure. As the days shortened and winter's chill approached, Evelyn found herself increasingly restless. The charitable endeavors filled her time, but not the void in her heart. She longed for the authenticity she'd found on the ranch, the unguarded moments with Colt, and the pure, unconditional love from Levi. The paper airplane remained on her desk, a constant reminder of the life she'd left behind. Unable to ignore the pull any longer, Evelyn made a decision. She penned a letter to Colt, pouring out her feelings, her regrets, and her hopes. She spoke of the changes she'd implemented through the foundation, inspired by Levi's courage and Colt's unwavering dedication. She confessed that, despite the physical distance, her heart had never truly left Montana. Days later, Colt found the letter in his mailbox. As he read Evelyn's heartfelt words, a myriad of emotions surged within him: anger, longing, hope. He walked to the porch, letter in hand, and gazed out at the horizon where the sun dipped below the mountains. The memories of Evelyn's time with them were as vivid as the colors painting the evening sky. Levi approached, sensing his father's turmoil. "Dad, do you think Mary—" He paused, correcting himself. "Evelyn will ever come back?" Colt looked down at his son, seeing the earnest hope in his eyes. He knelt beside Levi, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I don't know, son. You'll know, son. But sometimes, when you care about someone, you have to give them the space to find their way back." Levi nodded slowly, then held out a freshly folded paper airplane. "Can we send her a message? Maybe she'll find her way back to us." Colt smiled, a glimmer of hope igniting within him. "Yeah, buddy. Let's do that." Together they crafted a simple note, attaching it to the paper airplane. With a shared glance, they released it into the open sky, watching as the wind carried their message toward the unknown, hearts entwined with hope and the quiet kind of love that bridges any distance. In the heart of Montana, where the horizon stretched endlessly beneath a canopy of cerulean sky, Colt Dawson stood at the edge of his modest ranch, the crisp autumn air carrying whispers of the past. The golden hues of the setting sun bathed the landscape, casting elongated shadows that danced across the fields. It had been months since Evelyn Langford had left, retreating to her world of affluence and obligations, leaving behind a silence that echoed through the halls of Colt's home. Levi, Colt's young son, had shown resilience beyond his years. His laughter still rang out as he played with the ranch's loyal dog, Rusty, and his curiosity remained insatiable. Yet, in the quiet moments, Colt noticed the lingering glances toward the horizon, as if the boy expected Evelyn to appear on the crest of the hill, her hair catching the sunlight, her smile as warm as the summer breeze. Colt's heart ached with the weight of unspoken words and unresolved feelings. He had wrestled with the sting of deception upon discovering Evelyn's true identity as the heiress to the Langford fortune. Yet, beneath the layers of betrayal lay the undeniable truth of their shared moments. The gentle touch of her hand, the way her eyes softened when she looked at Levi, the unguarded laughter that had filled their home. One evening, as the first stars began to punctuate the twilight sky, Colt found himself seated at the worn wooden table, a pen poised over a blank sheet of paper. The words that eluded him in conversation now flowed onto the page, each stroke of ink a bridge spanning the chasm between regret and hope. He wrote of Levi's growth, of the changing seasons on the ranch, and of the void her absence had created. He spoke not as a man scorned, but as one who had come to understand the complexities of the human heart. Folding the letter with care, Colt addressed it simply. "Evelyn Langford." He hesitated for a moment before adding just Evelyn. The next morning he entrusted the letter to the local postmaster, watching as it disappeared into the canvas sack, bound for a destination that felt both distant and intimately familiar. Days turned into a week, and life on the ranch continued its weak, steady rhythm. Colt found solace in the routine, the early morning chores, the tending of livestock, the shared meals with Levi. Yet, beneath the surface, anticipation simmered, a quiet hope that his words would find their way to Evelyn's heart. In a bustling city far removed from Montana's tranquil plains, Evelyn sat in her opulent office, the skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The world around her buzzed with activity, yet she felt an unshakable emptiness. Her days were filled with meetings and philanthropic endeavors, her nights with events that demanded a smile she no longer felt. When the letter arrived, its unassuming envelope stood in stark contrast to the gilded invitations and official documents that typically adorned her desk. Recognizing Colt's handwriting, her breath caught and her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. With each word, the walls she had meticulously constructed around her heart began to crumble, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. Evelyn knew that returning to Montana meant confronting not only Colt and Levi, but also the fears, and not only Colt and Levi, but also the fears, insecurities that had driven her away. Yet the pull was undeniable. She yearned for the authenticity she'd found on the ranch, the unfiltered love of a child, and the steadfast presence of a man who saw beyond her lineage to the woman she truly was. Amber and Rose, a figure appeared on the dusty path leading to the Dawson Ranch. Levi, perched on the fence, was the first to spot her. His eyes widened, and with a jubilant cry of "Evelyn!" he leaped down, racing toward her. Colt emerged from the barn, his heart pounding a rhythm of hope and apprehension. He watched as Evelyn knelt to embrace Levi, her own tears mingling with the boy's laughter. When she finally stood, their eyes met, a universe of unspoken emotions passing between them. Taking a tentative step forward, Evelyn's voice was a whisper carried by the evening breeze. "Colt, I'm ready to start over, if you'll have me." Colt closed the distance between them, his calloused hand reaching to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Not as not as Langford's heiress," he murmured, his gaze unwavering. "Just Evelyn." A smile, genuine and radiant, broke across her face. Just Evelyn. As the first stars shimmered in the vast Montana sky, Colt drew her into a tender embrace, the past's shadows giving way to the promise of a shared future. Levi's laughter echoed around them, a melody of innocence and joy, as the trio stood united beneath the heavens, hearts entwined in the quiet kind of love that endures. Roots and rings, the spring in Montana came slowly, like an old man waking from a deep sleep, hesitant, creaky, but beautiful in its unfolding. The snow had begun its retreat into the higher ridges, leaving behind muddy roads and shy buds poking out from the cold earth. Evelyn Langford, no longer Ella, not quite a Langford in spirit, stood barefoot on the back porch of the Dawson home, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that read "World's Okayest Mechanic." Colt had rolled his eyes when Levi gave it to him for Christmas. He still used it every day. Evelyn's hair was tucked into a loose braid that Levi had insisted on helping her with, awkward fingers tangling in golden strands, a boy's laughter mixing with the bird-song of early morning. The smell of bacon drifted out the screen door, Levy's handiwork. He was 12 now, taller, wiser, and still utterly himself. From inside, Conrad's voice read aloud the story of Pegasus from Levy's astronomy book. The boy had insisted his grandfather take the reins that morning. Evelyn smiled. A year ago, the thought of Conrad Langford willingly reading about mythical horses before breakfast would have been absurd. Now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When Colt stepped onto the porch behind her, she didn't startle. She leaned back instinctively, resting against him. "You're up early," he murmured, his chin brushing the top of her head. "Couldn't sleep." She tilted her face to meet his eyes. Too full. In the best way. Colt didn't speak for a moment. just stood there, his arms wrapped around her, the way roots wrap around the base of a strong tree, not flashy, but permanent. "I've been thinking," he said eventually, voice low, "about planting something." She turned, eyebrows raised. "You already have the best garden in the valley." "I've seen the neighbors jealous of your zucchini," he chuckled. "Not like that. I mean something that marks us. A beginning, one we choose." Her smile faded into something softer, more serious, like a tree. He nodded. "Yeah, and maybe something else." From his pocket, Colt pulled out a small wooden box, clearly handmade, probably by him. Inside, nestled in rough velvet, sat a ring, not diamond, not platinum, a simple gold band, etched with a tiny star and an engraving only she would understand. "Home is where we land." And then she cried, pressing her forehead against his. She nodded before she even found the words. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times. Yes." Later that day, Levi helped them plant the tree. A young aspen, its roots still tender. He insisted on tying a small note to one of its branches. "This is where our new story grows," it read, in slightly crooked handwriting. The ceremony, if it could be called that, was just them. No photographers, no lavish venue. Just a windy hill behind the garage, with wildflowers growing along the fence line, and Conrad Langford handing Evelyn a bouquet of dandelions Levi had picked with meticulous care. "You'll get more out of these than roses," Conrad muttered, a little sheepish. Evelyn hugged her father fiercely. "They're perfect." So was the moment. They married with the sun dipping behind the mountains, turning the sky to watercolor gold. Evelyn wore a cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself with the help of Mrs. Radley from the local quilting circle. Levi stood between them, holding their hands in his smaller ones. Colt whispered vows that weren't poetic, but real, promises carved from long nights and hard-earned hope. Evelyn followed, her voice shaking but clear. "I vow to choose this life over and over, even when it's hard, especially then. Especially then." Levy's vows made everyone laugh and cry. "I promise to remind you when it's pizza night, even when you forget," he began seriously. "And I promise to always let you help with my science projects, even if you're not good at glue." They danced under string lights Colt had strung across the porch. Levi jed from an old speaker, announcing each song with theatrical flair. "This one goes out to my parents, both of them," he declared, "because they showed me what love looks like." Conrad sat at the edge of it all, watching his daughter dance barefoot in the grass, her laughter more valuable than any portfolio. He didn't belong to the corporate battlefield anymore. His daughter had taught him legacy wasn't about ownership. It was about love that outlasts. Later that night, when the stars came out in full, Evelyn and Colt sat on the porch swing. Levi had fallen asleep under the aspen tree, wrapped in a blanket, his paper airplane journal open beside him. "You still think this was the wrong road?" Evelyn asked, tracing the calluses on Colt's hand with hers. "Wrong road?" He shook his head. "I think it was the only road that ever made sense." Back inside, pinned to the wall above the dinner table, was a photo taken with a borrowed camera, a candid shot of the three of them laughing, dirt on their knees from planting the tree, Levi holding the shovel like a sword. Beneath it, in Colt's handwriting, a quote Levi had chosen from one of Evelyn's bedtime constellation stories. "Stars aren't born perfect. They're forged in pressure, and they burn because they have to shine. Just like love, and shine they did." Together, the first spring rain fell gently on the valley, washing the dust from winter's sleep. Wild flowers nudged through the thawing soil. The wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. It was the kind of evening that made you believe in new beginnings. Evelyn Langford, soon to be Evelyn Dawson, stood barefoot on the porch of the little farmhouse nestled between two tired hills, her old world further away than ever. The wooden ring on her finger was smooth from where her thumb had been rubbing it all day. It wasn't cut from diamonds or forged in platinum, but carved from the bench where Lily Dawson used to sit and hum lullabies to Levi in the fading light, and that made it more precious than any heirloom in the Langford vault. Inside, Colt was hunched over the kitchen table with blueprints spread out like a paper ocean. Levi sat beside him, legs swinging, scribbling ideas into the margins. "I think if we open up the old barn wall," Colt said, tapping the paper, "we can let in more light for the greenhouse section. You said you wanted room for that bee sanctuary, didn't you?" Evelyn smiled. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Bees are essential pollinators," Levi declared, parroting something he'd read. "And I think they'll like it here, just like us." Her chest ached with a tenderness so sharp it stole her breath. It still surprised her sometimes, how Levi could cut right to the heart of things with the ease of a child who saw the world without pretense. He was the true architect of everything they were building. She stepped back inside, rain-kissed and smiling. "We'll need signage," she said, sliding into the third chair. "If we're opening the new wing of Dawson Langford Farm as a community wellness project, folks will want to know how to get here." Colt looked up at her. "And we'll need hands to help build it." "I've already spoken with the high school principal," Evelyn said. "The woodshop class is eager to pitch in. They'll get class credit. We'll supply tools and lunch," he chuckled. "We'll supply tools and You're good at this." "I'm good with spreadsheets and donors," she said, brushing her hand across his. "You're good with building things that last." Their fingers lingered for a moment, Levi too absorbed in his bee sketches to notice. The air between them buzzed with quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't ask for promises, because it already knows. The first hammer fell on a Saturday morning. Neighbors from miles around showed up, some out of curiosity, others out of loyalty, and a few just for Evelyn's lemon lavender cookies. The town of Bridger Hollow had once viewed her as the billionaire runaway, the daughter of a cold empire. But now folks saw her differently. The woman who remembered names, stayed late to clean up, and knew how to patch a fence. Even Conrad Langford showed up. He wore flannel like he was still learning how to be soft, standing awkwardly near the tool shed until Levi trotted up and handed him a paintbrush. "Today, we're painting signs. You can pick blue or yellow. Those are the bee-friendly colors." The older man stared at the small can in his hands, as if it held more than just paint, perhaps possibility, perhaps penance. He crouched down and began brushing wide, careful strokes. Later, someone would ask Evelyn who the older gentleman was, and she'd reply, "He's family," without hesitation or explanation. By summer, Dawson Langford Farm was more than a home. It had become a haven. Children from town came to tend the garden and learn how to plant lettuce that didn't come from a plastic bag. Elderly veterans visited the greenhouse to breathe in warm soil and memories. Single parents gathered in the barn-turned-learning center, sharing advice over pots of coffee and donated storybooks. It wasn't just therapy, it was connection. And at the heart of it all was Levi, running through rows of sunflowers, inhaler in his back pocket, cheeks flushed with a joy Evelyn had never seen in the penthouses of her past. One warm July evening, they hosted a community dinner beneath strings of lights. Colt grilled ribs, Evelyn managed the pie table, and Levi gave a speech, unprompted, and with a few grass stains on his knees. "Thank you all for being part of our family's farm," he said, eyes shining behind oversized glasses. "We made this place because once I was really sick, and a lot of grown-ups helped me. So now we're helping back." The crowd applauded. Evelyn wiped away a tear. Beside her, Conrad stood with his hands in his pockets, Jaw tight. He's got your mother's heart, Evelyn said quietly. Conrad didn't answer at first, but then he said, he's got yours too, which is something I'm learning to be grateful for. Late that night, after the last lantern had been dimmed and Levi had curled up beneath the constellation quilt, Evelyn sewed with Mrs. Callahan from the library club. Colt and Evelyn stood together on the hill that overlooked the farm. She'd be proud, Evelyn whispered. Who? Colt asked, already knowing. Lily, Colt nodded, a quiet ache beneath the nod. She wanted this. A place full of joy, a place where Levi wouldn't just survive, but grow. Evelyn turned to him. But grow? Evelyn turned to him. Do you ever worry that I don't belong in it? All the time, he said, then smiled at her shocked face. Because what we have isn't simple. It wasn't handed to us. But I also know this. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, and handed it to her. Levi's handwriting sprawled across the page in blue crayon. Family people who stay, even when it's hard. Evelyn pressed the paper to her chest. He wrote this. He gave it to me the day I went to find you at the hospital. Said, give this to Mom when you're ready. Took me a while. I'm ready now, she whispered. He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with the deep kind of love that takes root and blooms quietly under stars. A year later, they were married beneath the orchard's old elm tree. The guests sat on mismatched chairs, and Levi carried the rings down the aisle in a little wooden box he built with Conrad. Evelyn wore a dress that had once belonged to her mother. Simple, ivory, laced with history. Colt wore a suit that didn't quite fit, but felt just right. There were no fireworks, just fireflies, no orchestra. Just Levy's school choir humming a melody Evelyn swore she'd never forget. When the vows were exchanged, Levi stood between. I now pronounce us the Dawson Langfords, he declared, stealing the minister's line. You may kiss each other, but not too much. Laughter rose like a song, and with it, so did Evelyn's heart. And with it, so did Evelyn's heart. In the end, legacy wasn't about companies or fortunes. It wasn't about names etched in gold. It was about hands covered in dirt, hearts wide open, and a paper airplane taped to the fridge with the words, "Home is the people." They were home now, together, always. A new horizon, the Montana sky stretched endlessly above, painted in hues of lavender and amber as the sun dipped below the horizon. Earl's Diner, a modest establishment with its weathered sign and familiar neon glow, stood as a beacon of warmth in the gathering dusk. Inside, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and homemade pies mingled, creating an inviting atmosphere that had long been a sanctuary for the townsfolk of Bridger Hollow. In their usual corner booth, Colt Dawson sat across from Evelyn Langford. Now, Evelyn Dawson, their hands intertwined on the table between them. Levi, their 12-year-old son, perched beside his father, eagerly digging into a slice of apple pie, his laughter occasionally punctuating the soft murmur of diner conversations. "Remember the first time we sat here?" Colt mused, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You were drenched from that storm, and I offered you my jacket." Evelyn chuckled, her eyes reflecting the diner's warm light. "I remember. I also recall you insisting that the best remedy for a cold was Earl's famous chicken pot pie." Levy grinned, looking between them. "And now we're here almost every Friday. It's like our family tradition." Their journey from that fateful rainy night to this moment had been anything but conventional. Evelyn, once the estranged heiress of the Langford tech empire, had found solace and purpose in the simplicity of small-town life. Colt, a steadfast mechanic with a heart as vast as the Montana plains, had opened his home and heart to her. Together they had built a life rooted in love, trust, and shared dreams. "How was the garage today?" Evelyn inquired, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Colt leaned back, a satisfied glint in his eyes. "Busy. Levi here is becoming quite the apprentice. Fixed up old Mrs. Thompson's pickup almost single-handedly." Levi beamed with pride. "Dad supervised, but I did most of the work." Evelyn reached over, ruffling Levi's hair affectionately. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on Evelyn's recent community outreach initiatives. She had spearheaded programs aimed at providing educational resources and vocational training to the youth of Bridger Hollow, bridging gaps and fostering a sense of unity within the community. As the evening wore on, the diner began to empty, leaving the Dawson family in a comfortable solitude. Earl, the diner's elderly owner, approached their table, wiping his hands on a well-worn apron. "It's good to see you all here," he said, his voice tinged with affection. "Feels like just yesterday when you first walked through those doors together." Colt nodded, gratitude evident in his expression. "Time flies, Earl. We're thankful for this place and the memories we've made here." Earl's eyes twinkled. "Well, here's to many more. Pies on the house tonight." After bidding Earl good night, the family stepped out into the cool night air. The town was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. They walked hand in hand, the rhythm of their steps in harmony with the peaceful surroundings. As they approached their home, a modest house with a wraparound porch and a garden that Evelyn had lovingly cultivated, Levi paused, looking up at the star-strewn sky. "Mom, Dad," he began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about something." Colt and Evelyn exchanged a glance before focusing on their son. "What is it, Levy?" Evelyn encouraged gently. He took a deep breath. "I know our family isn't traditional, but it's perfect to me. I was wondering, could we maybe have a ceremony, like to officially become a family?" Evelyn's heart swelled, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She knelt to Levi's level, cupping his face in her hands. "Oh, Levi," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We may not share blood, but you are my son in every way that matters. I'd be honored to have a ceremony to celebrate our family." Colt placed a steady hand on Levi's shoulder. "I think it's a wonderful idea, son." In the weeks that followed, the Dawson household buzzed with preparations. They decided on a simple ceremony in their backyard, inviting close friends and neighbors who had become an extended family. Evelyn worked tirelessly in the garden, ensuring that the flowers would be in full bloom for the occasion. Colt crafted a wooden archway, under which they would stand as a family, exchanging vows of commitment and love. The day of the ceremony arrived, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Rows of chairs were set up on the lawn, filled with familiar faces, beaming with joy. Levi stood between Colt and Evelyn beneath the archway, his eyes shining with happiness. Earl officiated the ceremony, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Today we gather to celebrate the union of not just two people, but three souls who have chosen to become a family." Colt turned to Evelyn, his gaze unwavering. "What struck me most about Colt, Evelyn, and Levi's story was not the drama or the wealth or even the rescue that began it all. It was the quiet courage behind their choices. As someone navigating adulthood and all its daily uncertainties, I saw myself in Colt's worn strength, in Evelyn's internal conflict, and even in Levi's vulnerable resilience. Their story is one of building something beautiful out of broken pieces, not because life made it easy, but because love made it worth the effort. And in that I found a mirror for my own life. Like Colt, I know what it's like to carry burdens in silence, to count bills before paychecks, to feel the sting of wanting to give someone you love more than you have. And like Evelyn, I've known the ache of belonging everywhere and nowhere all at once, of being seen for what I could give, rather than who I truly am. Their journey reminded me that healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives in shared dinners, in mended fences, in small acts of trust rebuilt over time. The idea that love could be imperfect and still whole moved something deep inside me. That a child's trust, once broken, could be slowly and gently restored. That a person could shed everything they'd been taught to be, and instead choose authenticity, even if it meant walking away from everything familiar. There's a line from the story that stays with me. Sometimes the best kind of family isn't born, it's built, one act of kindness at a time. I think about that when I show up for the people in my life, not always perfectly, but consistently. When I take the time to listen, to forgive, to try again. When I extend grace not just to others, but finally to myself. That lesson, that love is less about grand gestures and more about the quiet, steadfast showing up, has shaped how I treat the relationships in my own life. It softened my edges, reminded me that even when things fall apart, there's still hope to build again. The story of Colt, Evelyn, and Levi isn't just a fairy tale romance. It's a roadmap for those of us learning how to create belonging in a world that so often tells us we don't fit. It reminded me that we all deserve to be loved, not for what we offer, but simply for who we are. And maybe most powerfully, it showed me that sometimes the richest lives aren't the ones with the most money, but the ones with the most meaning. Their story challenged me to ask myself, what kind of legacy am I building? And how can I make sure it's rooted not in fear or perfection, but in love, trust, and courage? In the end, like them, I want to be remembered not for what I had, but for who I held, and how fiercely I chose to love. Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the heartland of America, a quiet countryside, or maybe a bustling city, dreaming of open fields? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of warmth in your day, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another uplifting story like this. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.